I know you're at work right now, but could you pick up the kids from school this afternoon? Melanie, I don't have time to pick them up. I've got a meeting with my boss at 3. Well, I don't have time either. I dropped them off this morning. So dropping off the kids this morning have to do with me picking them up this afternoon. I just thought it would be nice if you were for you to give in, and then I'm the one who always carts them around. Melanie, that's part of your job. That's what you're supposed to do. I'm not against helping the children out when I can, but it sounds like you think I owe it to you. Well, that's how you act when you come home. You seem to think that after working all day, you deserve to come home to a family or an in-house and the kids all taken care of. After I worked all day, hard all day, I do come home expecting to have done all the things you're supposed to do. I don't think that's unreasonable. Look, if you don't want to help me out, just say so. It's not that I don't want to help you out. I can't help you out. And I resent you laying a guilt trip on me like I'm doing something wrong. Pete, I'm not laying a guilt trip on you. I just said it would be nice if you would help me out with the kids once in a while. Oh, so I never help you out with the kids? Look, don't call me at work again unless you have a genuine emergency on your hands. I didn't know the kids and I didn't know that the kids and I have to be dying to call you to ask for help. We got a little dysfunction here, don't we? A little bit of dysfunction. Hidden in the deepest recesses of our minds is a lie that's accepted as a self-evident truth in our world today. Consequently, a lot of us grow up being told not only that it is right, the right way to think, but also that no one should ever question or disagree with us about it. And this lie rears its ugly head in marriage and leads to conflict that never seems to get resolved, and a husband and wife feeling bitter and resentful. Let's put on our mental spelunking gear and see what this lie is all about. Again, the lie: I'm entitled to what I want from my spouse. Entitled, that word entitlement. That word entitled. What's another word we could throw in there? Well, yes, that's an attitude. Yeah.
Deserve.
I deserve. I'm owed. Right? And remember when we were talking about, over the last couple of weeks, when we've been talking about how, remember how we've been talking about how what's the word I'm looking for? The way the Bible describes marriage as a covenant and how that's different from contract. Deserve, owe, and entitle are all contract language, right? So we're kind of getting into that same kind of a mess again when we use those words. Entitle, owe, deserve, that's all contract language. If I owe you something, that means, the contract says, all right, you do this, I do this, you do this, I do this. Deserve, entitle are kind of the same thing, right? It's contract language. We live in a world that tells us we are entitled to things in life, okay? The largest fast food company in the world tells us we deserve a break today. And one of the world's largest retailers declares, expect more, pay less. Motivational speakers tell us to never settle for anything less than you deserve and to demand the very best. Everywhere we turn, we are told we are entitled to things. We should demand having things our way, expect people to give us what we want, when we want, and believe we are owed nothing less. Is that an accurate representation of the advertising out there? Becky has already been grumbling a little bit this week. Christmas things are starting to roll out on TV and in other things. She does enjoy watching a Hallmark movie, but she is a little bit perturbed that it is the end of October. We haven't even hit Halloween yet, and they're already talking about the countdown to Christmas movies starting before Halloween. So, we're already entering into that season. We're already coming up, and what is the advertising? What's one of the most common, there's two types of commercials that haven't changed much in the last 20 to 30 years, and actually
One type of them actually, if you watch, sometimes they'll recycle those 20-year-old commercials. It's hilarious watching those 20-year-old commercials pop up. The ones I'm talking about that have been recycled forever, perfume commercials. They don't ever really change, do they? It's some sort of dramatic whatever thing. The ones that pop up that are like 20 years old or maybe even older at this point, the Elizabeth Taylor ones. They roll that commercial out at least a few times every year around the holidays, right? For that perfume, and the lady's been dead for a while. And then you've got car commercials, particularly the one I'm thinking of, big red ball on the top, Lexus, right? The best present you can get your spouse this year, or that you owe yourself because you deserve it, is a brand new Lexus, one of our cars that costs a whole lot of money with a big red bow on top. This is what we deal with day in and day out, right? That's one of the... What are the advertisers appealing to? They're not dumb. Okay, coveting. When somebody comes up and says, "You deserve this," they're flattering. They're scratching that prideful part of you that's like, "Oh yeah, I think I might do deserve this. Yes. Thank you for reminding me of how awesome I am." They know it feels good, and so they scratch that little thing, right? That's why there's a reason why they do these commercials. It's because they work, right? They work. At the risk of throwing this book across the room, I want to tell you that all of those ideas are godless nonsense and will irreparably damage your marriage if you believe them. That's pretty blunt, isn't it? Right? That's pretty blunt. If you go into your marriage believing that you are entitled to things from your spouse, love, kindness, fairness, honesty, openness, support, help, sex, a break from the kids, a hall pass on getting your work done each day, a romantic weekend to the south of France, and so on, you are ensuring that your relationship will be unpleasant, unsafe, unstable, and that the two of you will have a hard time ever feeling close. Let me explain. At least two things can happen when you feel entitled to your spouse giving you what you want. By the way, you can, as often is the case with these chapters, there's a lot of things you can just apply to just interpersonal relationships in general, right? So at least two things can happen when you feel entitled to your spouse giving you what you want. One is that he or she actually gives it to you. Let's say Kathy, a talented and hardworking lawyer, comes home from a long day at work and expects her husband Sam, an underemployed part-time sales associate at a local electronics store, to have dinner ready. When Kathy walks into the house, she sees that Sam has in fact gotten dinner ready. Given that Kathy felt entitled and that she expected Sam to do all this, all that rattles around in her mind as well. That's what he's supposed to do. She doesn't thank Sam or feel any appreciation for his effort or make her life easier when she comes home from work, even though he worked that day too. Consequently, the most flattering emotion Kathy experiences towards Sam for making dinner is selfish satisfaction. The second thing that can happen is that he or she doesn't give it to you. Let's say Kathy comes home from an especially grueling day at work expecting Sam to have dinner ready. Not only has he not gotten dinner ready, but Sam is playing Assassinate and Annihilate, a widely popular video game, on that super expensive flat screen television that he bought using Kathy's year-end bonus check. Sam, giddy over having just made his highest score ever, shares his excitement with Kathy. How do you think she will respond? There's a specific thing, and again, a lot of this kinds of stuff, yes, very much keyed into marriage, right? This is what the book's about. But you could apply this to interpersonal relationships with neighbors, friends, coworkers. There is a concept here in this thinking of entitlement that is usually grossly absent. Empathy. Empathy when you're feeling entitled, when you're feeling owed, when this lie is in full effect, you are usually completely missing any empathy for the other person. Because you are thinking entirely about you. And that's the big problem. Again, what does Paul say in Ephesians 5:21? Serve one another out of reverence for Christ. I keep going back to that, I know, but that's because right now for me, that's kind of one of the hubs of Christian marriage mentality. Serve one another out of reverence for Christ. If you're serving one another out of reverence for Christ, who are you thinking about? You're thinking of the other person and you're thinking of Christ, which means you're not spending as much time thinking about you. I've said recently, too, in church, that what you fill your heart with is what's going to steer your life. If you are filling your heart with you, and my needs and my rights and my privileges and what I want and how people are not fulfilling me and how they're not living up to their end of the bargain and how they owe me more time, more love, more kindness, more conversation, more hanging out, whatever it is, if you're filling yourself with thoughts about that and you, who aren't you really thinking about? Despite our great protestations to the contrary, perhaps. You aren't thinking about really the other or God. You see how Christianity really takes so much of this thinking that we just take for granted in our culture, just kind of completely turns on its head? Empathy can only really flourish if you are not spending much time thinking about what you are owed or what you deserve or what you want out of the relationship. If you are spending a lot of time obsessing about that, you are going to have a very hard time truly being empathetic. Because you're not going to be thinking about what they want, you're going to be thinking about what, and then the way the sinful nature takes empathy and twists it in something like this, is that, okay, I will think about doing things to make them happy so that they do things to make me happy. And instead of actually just giving to the person for the sake of their joy and giving to them, what are you doing? You're actually giving in order to get, which is a kind of a using, right? You're not treating your spouse as a valuable person so much as you're treating them like a vending machine. If I punch the certain combination of stuff that I know they like, then they will give me something I want. Can you have empathy when you're thinking like that? No, because your concern is, well, I want a cheeseburger, so I'm going to go up and punch, maybe not a cheeseburger, but I want a cheeseburger, and so I'm going to go up and punch in the combination, and out should spit a cheeseburger no matter what they've been doing, thinking, or dealing with. And when they don't spit out the cheeseburger, or they maybe spit out the cheeseburger, but it's not the way we want them to spit out the cheeseburger, then we get mad at them. Is there empathy there? Not really. You're looking at the cheeseburger that is less than perfect when maybe they've had I'll be really blunt, maybe they've had a hell of a day. And the fact that they even got one spat out, cheeseburger metaphorically or literally, maybe that took a ton of effort. Empathy. All right. Bottom of the page. You don't have to be a marital therapist to know that Kathy is going to feel bitter and resentful toward her husband. And since she believes that Sam's failure to prepare dinner is what made her feel this way, she's likely to pay him back in some hurtful manner, options including throwing the game in the trash, not speaking to him for the rest of the night, slamming the cabinet doors in the kitchen while she makes dinner, and withholding sex. There's all kinds of different ways that we can seek, and again, be very blunt. What are we doing when somebody doesn't give us our spouse or a friend, but let's stick with spouse primarily, because that's the focus of the book, when they don't quite give us the what we want, the way we want, when we want, if we're living this lie? What do we do? Okay, which is a type of revenge. And if we're feeling particularly self-righteous and smug and persecuted, again, one of the things about living this lie is that you spend a lot of time thinking about, boy, I work so hard, I put up with a lot. But what are you missing there again? Empathy. Because empathy is going to go, well, maybe they put up with quite a bit too. Right? Maybe they put up with a bunch. When we seek revenge, one of the nasty things about this lie and this mentality is that when we are letting ourselves feel particularly entitled, remember how we were talking about love languages? Sometimes I think some people think that they don't know what the love language is. Actually, I would say that they probably do, because if they're living this lie, they know how to hurt, right? They know how to hurt. And how do you hurt? By taking away or stomping on their love language. Right? So actually, I think we probably know. If you know what would absolutely crush your spouse, you know actually, whether you realize it or not, you know what their love language is. Because you know how to hurt them. Which actually means, in a more sanctified way, when filled with Christ and His love, when you're thinking empathetically and selflessly, and you're thinking you're going to Ephesians 5:21, you actually know what to do then, right? It's just that you're not going to be using it to hurt. You're going to be using it to be healed. You're going to use it to heal and to build up. This is the thing about the lie that is so insidious. You just spiral down, right? And you spiral down. One person bites, and then the other person bites, and then the other person bites, and then the other person bites, and the biting keeps biting, and the biting gets worse. Because what do hurt people do? Hurt people hurt. Hurt people hurt. And it keeps spiraling down, right? And it keeps spiraling down. And that's why in so many relationships, particularly marriages, you see a lot of pain. Because you have a couple of people who in their best moments are seeking to love each other, and in their worst moments can hurt each other like nobody else. All right. We get into pages 79 and following. We get into a kind of an extended illustration on David's life, right? And it's David and Bathsheba. We're not going to reread the whole thing. I think we're, generally speaking, in broad terms, probably all familiar with the story. What was David's sense of entitlement in the story? Okay, I'm the king. I'm the king, and that woman is hot, and I want that woman. That was his sense of entitlement. And he let his, I'm going to be delicate here, he let his hormones get ahead of his brain. And his pride, ultimately, right? His pride, ultimately, too. And pride factors into so much of this. That's why he mentions pride at the beginning of the chapter by quoting Proverbs 3. He could have quoted a lot of other verses, too, right? From Proverbs. So David gets himself into all kinds of trouble. And we see how one deception and one lie just kind of, it all compounds and continues to compound, right? This is how that story works. It's a grand story of how trying to solve a mess by lying and deceit and other things just continued to make it worse, right? So David allows his heart to be filled with lust, and then he gets Bathsheba to the palace, and they do their thing, and then in order to cover the affair, he rather irregularly brings Uriah home to try to get him to come home for like a furlough weekend. Uriah, being the noble soldier that he does, tells his king that, my lord the king, well, my fellow soldiers, and remember this whole time too, one of the contextual things that we sometimes don't get when we're reading this account, I think we sometimes pass it over. Okay, so we're familiar, like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, right? Those are his 12 guys. Those are Arthur's 12 guys. They're the best of the best. They're his most trusted, most faithful guys, right? Uriah was one of David's mighty men. He's listed among the mighty men. Uriah is listed as one of the mighty men. It's basically, in David's world, this is David's round table. Uriah is one of those guys. This isn't just some random soldier. This is a guy that David has probably served with, fought with, and bled with. Yeah. And there's a level of trust there. And Uriah comes home and says, my lord the king, well, our fellow soldiers in the field, I don't feel right going home and taking it easy for a couple of days. He sleeps on the front steps of the house. David's like, I'm never going to be able to cover this affair. And he panics. And then he orders, in one of the darkest moments of David's life, in an act of, to be perfectly frank, crass, terrible, horrible cruelty and sin, David orders Uriah's death. And lie upon lie upon lie, culminating in murder. And the tragic thing about this whole thing is that in a different story, in a different context, we actually see a very similar pattern with a roundly condemned king of Israel named Ahab, right? Ahab wants a vineyard. Naboth says, nope, I'm not going to sell it. That's okay. Thanks for offering, but I want to keep it in the family. I don't want to sell it. Ahab goes home and pouts. And then lie upon lie, Naboth is falsely accused. He's brought in for trial. He's falsely condemned. He's wrongly accused and condemned to death. And that's how Ahab gets the vineyard. Right? And it all starts with what we call coveting, which is a kissing cousin to that word entitlement. Every time, if you want to put it this way, if you want to take something out of this chapter, I want you to think of the word entitlement as this relates to this lie, and I want you to tie it to what we call the 9th and 10th commandment, you shall not covet. Because there's a lot of very close linkage there. All right. So, we're going to pick up on 82 in a second here, the truth about marriage. Any thoughts so far? Reaction, questions? Anything in the chapter that he brought up that you were wondering about? Okay. Not seeing any hands? Then let's look at 82. While David had many wonderful qualities and achieved great things, Christ, being God in human form, was a million times more intelligent, wise, discerning, courageous, powerful, gifted, strong, and moral. In leaving heaven, Christ gave up his status and privilege and made himself nothing here on earth. That's Philippians 2:7 again. He denied himself on earth and yet in a way that ought to fry our mental circuits. Christ never felt entitled to anything. And again, think of how Christianity turns things on its head. If there's one being in the history of this universe walking on this planet, one human being who maybe could make an argument for entitlement, who would it be? It would be the Lord of heaven and earth, the one who made everything. I mean, if anybody's owed anything, who is it? It's the one who owns it, right? The one who made it. It's the God who made this universe, and yet what does Christ not do? He doesn't demand. It's a phrase that's popular for another reason in our context, but is useful for our discussion. He didn't use his power and privilege to his advantage. He didn't. That's Ephesians 2 at the beginning. Instead, he humbled himself. He showed perfect empathy. That shows up in our epistle lesson this morning in our sermon text. He shows perfect empathy. He thinks of the other, right? Jesus' whole life is spent thinking of his Father and the other, his Father and the other, his Father and us, and what the plan was, and what he had to do in order to save us, and what he had to do in order to bring us forgiveness, life, and salvation. That's Christ's thinking and mentality. And what isn't he then doing? He isn't spending time then thinking about himself and what he's owed, and how people aren't treating him like they should, and how people aren't nice to him, and they're not, James, I just performed this miracle. Why can't you at least get me my sandals? Peter, for goodness sake, I spend all this time teaching you. Can't you at least just take out the trash? Or looking over the crowds. I spend so much time and so much energy on you guys. Why would it be so hard for you all just to give me a day off? If Christ thought and acted like that, how would the Gospels, if Christ thought and acted like us, how would the Gospels read? Yeah. Jesus would come across as probably a self-pitying, persecuted, just mess of a person, right? Why doesn't anybody like me? I do all this stuff for them. Why doesn't anybody like me? Why is everybody so mean to me? Why doesn't anybody want to spend time with me? I do all these miracles and do all this stuff, and all they want to do is yell at me and plot my death. Again, if Christ acted like us, yeah, it kind of really makes clear how, when he said a number of pages ago, back on page 77, now do you understand why he said what he said? Maybe a little bit. At the risk of you throwing this book across the room, I want to tell you that all these ideas are godless nonsense and will irreparably damage your marriage if you believe them. Now do you understand why he said it? Because if we applied those kinds of things that we do so easily as human beings, and if Christ was the one doing them, we would look at Jesus like he had gone insane. Because that's not the Jesus we see or know, right? That's not the Jesus we see or know in Scripture. It would strike us as being just wrong, and we'd be right. But we don't apply this to ourselves. Well, that's just Jesus. Well, Jesus says, follow me. Right? Follow me. All right. Top 83. Having the attitude of Christ in marriage means that you understand this. You are not now, nor will you ever be entitled to anything from your spouse. He italicizes that, I think, because he wants to make the point. Right? If you're one to highlight or star things, it would be a good thing to highlight or star because, again, it is so different, right? It's a different way of thinking. This means you do not think you are entitled to your spouse being loving, kind, thoughtful, supportive, sexual, responsible, hardworking, giving, loyal, attentive, or anything else. It means you understand having positive attributes or great successes doesn't make you entitled to having a spouse who is everything you want him or her to be, or who does everything you want. It means you understand you do not deserve payback for anything from anyone. It's a different way of thinking, isn't it? A very different way of thinking. Now again, within the Christian marriage, okay, let's look at the positive for a second here. Within a Christian marriage, if you have both spouses thinking like this, what's actually happening? No. If you're thinking like Christ, the stuff we just read. Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. Okay, and then so if both of you are thinking like Christ and showing good empathy and thinking of the other, what actually ends up happening? Though you don't demand, what still ends up happening? Both of you end up getting love, kindness, thoughtfulness, support, fairness, sex, hardworking, giving, loyal, attentive. You're getting all of that. If both of you are thinking like Christ, you're actually getting that. But it's not you sitting on the judge. Remember we were talking about this last week? Oh, stand forward here a little bit. There we go. Center of gravity. Smart. But it's not you standing on or sitting on the judge's seat demanding pound the gavel. What are we going back to? Christ-centered marriage is Ephesians 5:21. Serve one another out of reverence for Christ. So thinking positive, that's what you're getting. If you want to know how to get it, it's not by beating the other person over the head into submission. All of this stuff that the world spends so much time and energy chasing, it's really this simple. If you want something aspirational, you keep it simple. Both of you love like Jesus, and both of you will feel loved. But that also means both of you aren't demanding, and both of you aren't feeling entitled, and both of you aren't, again, what did we talk about before? Contractual thinking versus covenantal thinking, right? If you love like Jesus, if you both are loving like Jesus, you both will be loved. Those marriages, whether it's conscious or unconscious, those marriages that have lasted a long time, where the husband and wife get to year 50, year 60, and the grandkids and the friends and the neighbors and everybody else are like, boy, you still two love each other so much. How'd you do it? And they'll maybe say something, well, it just took a lot of time, and we figured it out over time, and they might not consciously know or be able to express what's going on, but it's probably something due to the fact that they both figured out at some point that the best way for both of them to be happy is for both of them to seek each other's happiness and quit thinking about themselves. And that is a game changer. That is a game changer. Whether it's like I said, marriage, which is supposed to be, or relationships in general. if you're thinking about yourself, you really don't have a whole lot of space to think about the other. All right. Christ was God in human form, didn't arrive on the planet feeling that he was owed anything. This was his very planet he created. And there's the very people he knit together in our mother's wombs. But Christ was laid in a feeding trough after he was born. And again, middle of page 83. He had to be taken to Egypt so Herod's assassins wouldn't murder him. He had no place to lay his head. And he was treated like the lowest of the lows while he was here. In light of all this, you can understand why it is so offensive to God that we feel entitled to things from him or from other human beings. If Christ, who was God, humbled himself enough not to feel entitled to things, is it that much of a leap to assume that God sees us being arrogant when we think we are entitled to anything? And again, what is the word that we often pair with arrogance? Pride. I think God's aversion to this sense of entitlement is partly why he responded the way he did to Job's questions and complaints. Remember Job? So Job is an interesting book. And I'm just going to talk about this for just a second. Job is a really interesting book. And in our modern colloquialism, we'll often still talk about somebody as having the patience of Job, right? The thing is that you don't have to go very far in the book to see Job's patience fraying. And then it's not too much past that Job's patience completely falls apart. So that by the end of the book, one of Victor's favorite spots, right? What is God doing? Can you paraphrase that for a second, Victor? You love describing this section.
Job says, why me? And then God basically shows him the expanse of the universe and says, you don't understand any of this, and gives him a sort of a smackdown of why.
Brace yourself like a man. Exactly. Right? That's the actual language.
Gird your loins.
Yes. God says, all right, put on your big boy pants. I'm coming. You want to complain to me? Put on your big boy pants. That's what God does at the end of Job. When Job finally snaps and basically shakes his fist toward heaven, right? It's interesting when we feel entitled, right? Job truly was. And this is the thing. Job was truly unfairly stripped of all the people he loved, possessions, physical health, peace of mind. He had reasons to feel anger, hurt, dismayed. Especially since the Bible describes him at the beginning of Job as being blameless and upright, feared God, shunned evil. But it still didn't entitle him. And that's the cultural inborn lie that is just so deeply ingrained. And it's not just American culture. I pick on American culture a lot as an American. But it's not just American culture, right? Because what is the normal human way of thinking? I'm good, I work hard, therefore God should let me into heaven, like me, love me, right? Give me stuff, right? I believe in God and I work hard and I serve him hard and God should bless me. That's entitlement thinking, which, by the way, is why a particular brand of Christianity can be so very dangerous. Prosperity gospel, prosperity preachers. Because it breeds entitlement. It takes people who are seeking God and plants in their brains a way of thinking that is, I agree with Dr. Thurman here, is patently unchristian. God is not a vending machine. Quit thinking as though he does, and anybody who preaches or teaches like that shouldn't be in a pulpit. I will be delicate enough not to mention specific names, but if you want to know a few, I'll tell you afterward. Yeah. God is not a vending machine. He does not owe us anything, and we are not entitled to great gobs of blessings, piles of money, and other worldly success because we're awesome, good Christians. Yeah. Anyway, okay, off that hobby horse. Let's see here. He's going to continue on 85 talking about not feeling entitled. I'm going to go middle of 85 because I think he touches on something good and human here. Middle of 85. I want to say one final thing about what it means to repent of having an attitude of entitlement in your marriage. Or should I say what it doesn't mean. Letting go or feeling you are entitled, letting go of feeling you are entitled doesn't mean you are letting go of wanting or desiring things from your spouse. It is perfectly appropriate to want or desire your spouse to meet your spiritual, emotional, sexual, and financial needs in marriage, to feel disappointed, hurt, sad, or frustrated when he or she doesn't. Let's go back to Christ's life to understand this. While Christ never felt entitled to anything from others, at times he put his needs in play and hoped they would be met. For example, when his soul was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death about the cross that waited him, Christ told his disciples to stay and keep watch while he went off to pray. After he finished praying, Christ came back and found them sleeping. We might say that Christ put his relational need for support in front of his disciples that day. I may be projecting my own human emotions into Christ and all this, but I sense hurt and sadness, even frustration in his words, when he asked these men who he had been pouring his heart and soul into for 3 years, couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Nevertheless, because Christ didn't feel entitled to their support, he wasn't bitter or resentful toward his disciples after they fell asleep when he needed them most. Okay, so if you're thinking in a Christian mindset, removing entitlement from your heart doesn't mean that you obliterate whatever your love language is. God wired you the way he wired you because he wired you that way. But you notice what he said here. After the disciples failed, what didn't Christ allow himself to slip into? Bitterness, grudge holding, right? He didn't allow himself to slip into that. You all have a particular, and I want to maybe end here on this on a little positive note here. You all have a particular love language. You probably, at this point in your life, know exactly what it is. And for your spouse to provide for you in that way is a good thing. But the Christian way of thinking is not to demand it. The Christian way of thinking is to express that need to your spouse, and then God willing, with God's grace, as they respond to you in Christ's love and with Christ's grace, is they will seek to fulfill that need for you. Which means there's a level of trust there, which takes marriage in the Christian context and puts it up again another little step again, right? This isn't just a contract between two parties seeking to get something for themselves, kind of like the world sometimes describes it. This is two people under God with God's blessing and God's help seeking to bring joy to the other, to learn about the other person, to learn what brings them joy, happiness, contentment, hope, peace, and so on and so on and so on, and to fill that need without expecting payment back. Again, within a Christian marriage, will we ever do this perfectly? No, we're sinners. We're going to fall short, right? And that's where grace and forgiveness come in, and mercy comes in. And we'll talk about that a little bit too in church today too, as we get to the second half of the text from Hebrews. But this mindset seeks, again, Ephesians 5:21, serve one another out of reverence for Christ, which means you are being empathetic, which means you are thinking about the other and you are thinking about Christ, but you aren't spending a whole lot of time thinking about you. In fact, a lot of times, in the most sanctified way, why would a husband, if he is thinking like Christ, why would a husband spend a lot of time maybe keeping himself in shape or taking care of himself? It's not to stroke his ego. If a husband is doing that and thinking about Christ, the husband is thinking like this. My God put me here to be a support and a help for my wife and to be a support and help for my kids. And by taking care of myself, I'm doing what I can that under God's blessing, I will be here around a long time to be here and be able to play with my kids and to be able to do things with my wife and to be able to play with my grandkids. You're doing it, you're doing what you're doing because you're thinking of the other. Have I made the point clearly enough that this is a weird way of thinking? At least from what we're used to in our culture. But can you see where this goes? If you both in a marriage are thinking like this, how awesome could that be? You want something to aspire to reach for? If both of you are loving and serving like Christ, how awesome and incredible would that be? All right, let's close with a short prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, we come before you this morning to thank you for your service, your humble service, your love, your mercy, your faithfulness. We have a simple request, though profound, this morning. We're going to ask you to help us think like you. Remove from our hearts senses of pride and sinful pride and entitlement. Help us to be like you, act like you, serve like you, love like you. That having our hearts warmed by you, we can build awesome marriages and show awesome marriages to our kids and grandkids that they, under God's grace, can then also emulate. We ask these things in your name. Amen. All right. Unless there's other questions that come up, we're going to pick up next time with the next chapter.